Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. I have a very special guest, my dear friend and brother in Christ, Nick Bellando. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, good to be here. Got my coffee. I'm ready.
I've got my
Yeah,
coffee, and by the way, look, see, everybody, you have the opportunity to buy an original Renzo Shakuhachi mug. So,
beautiful. Look at that.
and t-shirts. See, I was bothered so
Nice.
much by my students to make something, like make swag, and so I finally did.
Mm.
So now we'll have to be getting the Nick Bellando t-shirts soon as well.
Yeah. Some Hitoyogiri t-shirts would be a good idea.
Yeah,
Right.
I can't wait for them. So, who is Nick?
Mm.
What do you do?
Indeed. Who am I?
It's an
That's a
existential question.
poem by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right? There's a Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right? He's my guy. He says, "Who am I?" And he's all kind of thinking about identity. He's in prison from the Nazis and everything, right? Uh, and he writes this poem called "Who Am I?" And he's talking about, well, am I this one? Am I like kind of the bold face that I'm showing to everyone, or am I the sort of uh, coward that I feel like I am sometimes in my heart? And it's
Mm,
like, I don't know. They bother me, these questions of mine, right? But one thing I know, O Lord, I am thine, right? It says, I belong to God. That's who I am.
mhm,
Maybe in a deepest sense, I'd agree with that. I think that's who I am. Because the rest of things can change a lot, right? One day you're a kindergarten teacher, another day you're a beekeeper, another day you're working in a wood shop, and another day you're making shakuhachi. But that's the part of the things that I've done, which I just listed for you. The thing
yeah.
that resonates with me the most is making shakuhachi and playing and kind of taking a lot of hints from old ways of doing things, right? Like Confucius said, "Visit the old to know the new,"
Mhm.
and that's a word that I like a lot myself.
And so
Well,
you,
yeah, I could.
and so you're living now in Aomori, Japan, and you've been there for quite a while now. And so, how long have you been living in Japan?
Yeah, I like how the way I just answered your question by not answering it. By the way, I thought that was pretty good. Yeah, I've been in Japan for quite a while. I came first in 2008. Towards the end of 2008, I moved here.
Mhm.
Um, and if you want to hear it, I can certainly tell you stories.
Mhm.
But yes, I'm living in Aomori, Hirosaki, and I got here by kind of a circuitous roundabout route.
Mm.
I um I came to Japan kind of without a plan. I had already been playing shakuhachi, so that was part of what drew me here. I liked Zen philosophy, Chinese philosophy, right?
Mhm.
There was a lot of things that kind of took root in Japan that I was attracted to. Um, Part of my path to becoming a Christian, of course, involved shakuhachi and Chinese philosophy. So there's two things there, and I also wanted to be, I don't know, I kind of feel like, for me anyway, I wasn't sure, like, well, when do I know that I'm a man, you know? And I guess a lot of people have thought that, right? You've got that good old Rudyard Kipling poem, If, about what it means to be a man, right? And there's some good quotes from that one too. But I felt like life was too easy. I felt like I could tell that I wasn't mature, and I felt like I needed something that was difficult to do.
Mm.
So I got a one-way ticket to Japan, and I came over to see what would happen.
Mm. I think there's if we're gonna we can do our quote battle now. There's a quote by Socrates, which is the unexamined life
Hmm.
is unworth living. And it kind of sounds like that was a little bit of the process there. Is like you knew some things you liked, but you wanted to go in and search more and find out, take a risk somewhere. And would you say that that was probably the journey, like really figuring out what you want to do in order to discover um, what you were going to be?
Yeah, I mean that's also a big question, right? Like, what do you like, and how do you answer that? That's a lot of what playing shakuhachi has been for me. It's been sort of an exploration of those two questions, right? Who am I, and what do I like?
Mm.
That's quite involved in both of those. Um, And because sometimes finding what you like means purposely doing things that you don't like and trying to figure out why it is that you don't like them, or doing things that you're not good at, just as much as it often means doing, finding things that you are good at and doing them. I've always kind of approached it from both ways.
Mm. I really resonate with that a lot too, because when I decided to move to Japan with my wife, it was just well, let's just go and try. Like, there's nothing to lose. In terms of going, we don't have kids yet. We didn't have any mortgages or loans, or we weren't in debt with anything. So we said, let's just go and experience it and give it a shot. And it's been a wonderful experience for us. It helped me with deepening shakuhachi as well. So I resonate with a lot of those things that you're saying in terms of that. But before we even get to more about the things that you're doing with shakuhachi and other instruments, how were you first introduced to the shakuhachi, and how did that go?
Yeah, that's a fun story too. I was just about to graduate high school, I think, and I was interested in world music. Like I was listening to Ravi Shankar and this kind of stuff, and I liked the idea of this sound that doesn't necessarily fit on the piano, right?
Hmm.
It's like, I want an instrument that can like kind of make all kinds of different sounds. And I had this vague sense that the Japanese flute would do that. So I looked up Japanese flute on, it might have been Google. I think Google was around then, maybe an early iteration of Google when they still had the motto "Do no evil," which they got rid of. But and anyway, so I came up with plans for a PVC shakuhachi. So I made a plastic shakuhachi for myself, and I was fiddling around with it. Go out to the woods and play it with those. I loved that, like, so many sounds out of something with just five holes.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I also found that it was something that I could use for prayer too, like kind of just sitting by a stream or something and listening to things going by and kind of letting my sound blend in with what I was hearing and finding a way for the things that I was feeling to flow.
Hmm.
It I think that mature people need to regulate their emotions, but you don't regulate your emotions by suppressing them, and you regulate them by being able to express them skillfully. And that's how you avoid violence, right? That's why 2-year-olds are always hitting and punching, because there's stuff they want to express and they don't know how to express it.
Hmm.
And I found shakuhachi could kind of express these things that I didn't have words for yet.
Hmm.
Um, and then as I was doing that for a year or two, and I didn't know anything about shakuhachi music. I was just playing whatever. I was kind of playing that 5-note scale, like fiddling around with the black keys on the piano or something.
Hmm.
And it turns out, kind of by coincidence, my mother is having lunch with her friend, and she's like, "Yeah, Nick got this kind of shakahari or something that he's playing with, right?" And she's like, "Oh, you mean shakuhachi? Yeah, I play that." So one of the 3 or 4 people in New Jersey who played shakuhachi at the time happened to be my mother's friend, Patricia. So she became my first shakuhachi teacher.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is interesting, and I think you've told me that story before on another time that we've met and hung out. And so some things are like, oh yeah, I remember when you told me that like 3 weeks ago or something. And that's interesting. That reminds me a lot of one of the last interviews I did with my friend Jonan, who had even started working and living as a komso. And his experience was he heard it on an album track, and then it wouldn't leave him. It was just in his mind. So he bought one, and just started playing it, much like you did. Just would walk around campus with his flute and just play. So he's like the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
weird guy with the heavy metal T-shirt and a shakuhachi, just playing some tunes underneath the bush. And but yeah, it's a very natural way to approach it. And I remember the first time I got my flute too. I had like some just cheap Amazon flute, and then I kind of like fiddling around with it. And I had known about honkyoku and everything, but there's just this thing like with shakuhachi, and I feel that's really different than other instruments, which just like lends it to be improvisatory, where you just
Yeah,
start,
yeah.
and it's like, of course you can do that with other instruments, but it's the like much like the Native American flute too. It's just so you grab it and then you just start noodling around.
Yeah, like even if you don't, as long as you can make a sound, I guess that's the big hurdle for everybody. It took me a
Yeah.
while because I had this like badly made plastic shakuhachi that I made myself. It took me a month to make a consistent sound. But
Hmm.
once I was there, I was just like, oh, you can just kind of blend the sounds however you want to, and it kind of sounds good, even if you don't know what sounds you're making, right?
Hmm.
So it was kind of a nice way to start off.
That's the brilliance of the pentatonic scale. It always sounds good.
Yeah.
I think
Yes,
it was
indeed.
Bobby McFerrin who talked about the universality of the pentatonic scale, and it gets audiences to sing in the pentatonic scale, and it's very natural for people, which is very interesting. So
Yeah.
you obviously find a love for shakuhachi. You blend it into your life. You blend it into your surroundings, and then you move to Japan. What happens next?
Yeah, so Patricia had introduced me to her teacher, Barry Weiss. So I came to visit a couple times, and I knew him, so I at least had a contact in Japan. And he was a really neat teacher in a lot of ways. One of the first memories I have with him is that I got my first exposure to Honkyoku, and it would have been in the early 2000s, I guess. And I was trying to play Choshi, and he's like, Nick, you're playing music, but Honkyoku is something a little bit different than that. And I think probably what he meant was I was probably trying to put a rhythm to it when it didn't have a rhythm, you know. Um, but I've always been drawn to things that I don't understand, and so that kind of made me want to just dive into it even more because it didn't really make sense to me at first. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So when I came to Japan, the first thing was like, well, okay, I'm here. I have a very small amount of savings. How do I make money? Um, and that was a lot harder than it seemed because I didn't have any official residence in Japan, and you can't really get a job unless you've got a visa. And for somebody to sponsor you for a visa, you've got to be trusted. So if you don't know somebody already who can employ you, then that becomes a little bit difficult.
Hmm.
So I got to the point where my tourist visa was almost finished. I was about to give up and try Vietnam instead. Uh, but I found this listing for a job in Sapporo with a Christian kindergarten.
Hmm.
I applied, did the interview via Skype. We hit it off, so I got the job and headed up to Sapporo. So I spent 2 years in Sapporo teaching kindergarten, which is not something that I would have ever expected to be doing. But
And did you have a functioning level of Japanese at that time?
every time I came to Japan, I tried to learn a little bit. I started listening to CDs.
Hmm.
I went to Bible college, so learning Japanese there wasn't an option. They had Hebrew and Spanish and Greek, right? So I took a little bit of Hebrew, but that didn't help me in Japan very much. So, once I started teaching the kindergarten, the part of my daily routine was to read books. I would take a book. One of them was one of Dr. Yamada's books, actually, that he wrote on Kambun, on a Chinese literature, basically.
Hmm.
And I certainly couldn't read a page, but I could read a sentence a day. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to read a sentence a day. I'm going to make flashcards from all the words that I don't know. And I had this, one of these color boxes, right, little
Ah,
bookshelves, and I put nails in it, and I hung up my ream of flashcards that I would make. So I ended up with like 200 of these flashcard packs, and that's how I study Japanese. I just read a little bit, write down the words I don't understand,
mhm.
look at them again, look at them again, right?
So you find yourself in Sapporo, and at some point you hook up with Dr. Yamada, and you start to dive into the world of Kimpuryu. And so, how did that happen? And what was so attractive, or what attracted you to Kimpuryu more than the other styles?
Yeah, it was funny. I when I was teaching kindergarten again, I like teaching because I like people. Some people will ask me sometimes, "Oh, do you like kids?" It's like, well, no, I like people. I like small people. I like big people. I don't care if they're young or old, but I like them because they're people, not specifically because they're kids. But I'm also kind of a low energy guy, so
Mhm.
teaching kindergarten definitely wore me out. So like during the summer, I decided to take a little trip And I ended up having kind of two big meetings on that trip. One of them, the first one was my wife, or my future wife. I met her at a church in Nanae outside of Hakodate. And then from there, I took a trip down to Hirosaki. And I always had my shakuhachi with me, you know. And the friend, well, I was introduced to a missionary down here, and they had some connections on the Hirosaki University campus and brought me along to meet some folks. And somebody saw my shakuhachi and they're like, "Oh, let's introduce you to Dr. Yamada." So I went and met him, and lo and behold, here's this guy who's got the local school of shakuhachi, plus he's a Kanbun professor, right? Chinese literature is his specialty. That's part of what brought me to Japan, right? He writes books about Zen in China, right? And Confucius and Lao Tzu and all these. So I'm like, I got to study with this guy. Mm-hmm. And so we talked together. I understood about 30% of what he was saying, and vice versa. And he's like, all right. He's like, let's make this happen. So 2 years later, after I first met him in 2009, I guess 2.5 years later, I married my wife, who's now my wife, and we came together to Hirosaki to live here, and so I could study under Dr. Yamada. Right. So then to answer your question about Kinpru Ryu, it's that was something different. You know, I hadn't really been exposed to it before. I knew the Myoan pieces, but I could see the connection, but there's this sort of Tohoku flavor, right? Northeastern Japan flavor to Honkyoku that's a little bit different from the Myoan pieces that I play, which are concentrated more in kind of out of the Kyushu area, right? Mm-hmm. It's nice having pieces from a warm climate and pieces from a cold climate. They give you sort of a little bit more of a rounded perspective on life when you put them together.
Well, I guess my real question now is, how is your Tohoku been?
Yeah, I don't know. I can understand more than some people and less than others. Yeah. So, we lived in the mountains for a little while. We were the youngest people there. The average age is probably 85 or so. Those were the young people.
Yeah.
And even my wife, she's from Hakodate, and then Hakodate Ben is very close to Tsugaru Ben in a lot of ways, but her parents were from Hiroshima though, so even for her, the elderly folks, really, really deep Tsugaru Ben was a bit difficult to understand. So there's you gotta smile a lot, right?
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard
probably.
The first time I heard Tsugaru Ben, I was like, wait, this is Japanese? And it was a very thick country accent style Tsugaru Ben. I was shocked how different the language was.
Yeah, not only is the accent different, but the entire vocabulary is taken from like Heian era Japan. It's all vocabulary that we don't use. Instead of me, you say manago, right? Instead of kawaii, you say mengoi, right? So there's just, there's not even related words. They're just different completely. Yeah, so it's just... Yeah. And then to add on top of that, younger folk around, it's a university town, so you get people from all over Japan. So it's not like you hear it every day, you only hear it when you go into the mountains, where it's a bit thicker.
And that's also a very historical point to bring up, is that, during the Heian period, many of the people were pushing up against the Ainu people and pushing them back up and up further up Japan. So it's kind of interesting that as soon as they moved away from the city center of Heian-kyo, you see that less changes with the language. It's almost, it's interesting of walking back in time with the linguistics there. So I recommend people to look up some of the early wars in the 1300s and 1400s of with Japanese versus the Ainu. There's a lot to be learned there and a lot to be recovered.
It's also there's something about mountain cultures that tend to preserve things, right? You talk about the Appalachians in the United States, and they have some really old iterations of English, right? Yeah. And the same when my ancestors come from the Piedmont in Italy, right? It's a sort of a mountainous region in northern Italy, and that's very similar there. There's a patois that's still left behind in the elderly population anyway. and it's
Hmm.
sort of like it's French plus Italian, and it's a little bit of a
Yeah.
mix of both, even in terms of pronunciation. But very similar situation to Tohoku, where the younger people don't really understand it, but the older people still speak it as their primary dialect, even,
Yeah, I think down here too in Nara, you hear some people, speak where they'll say "tashaya no," but it's very you don't really hear it that much anymore. You would probably be more likely to hear it when you watch a 1950s, 1940s film. Then you would hear people speak like that
Mm.
in there. So you're now. Let's skip ahead a little bit. I want to talk about a lot
Yeah.
of the work that you've been doing recently. So, of course, you've gone to extraordinary heights with your Shakuhachi career. You recently were given a living national regional living regional treasure of
Holder.
which one?
Yeah, I'm not the treasure. I'm holding the treasure.
Yeah, Holder.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, regional cultural treasure holder, I guess.
Mhm.
Right. So
And so why don't we stop? We'll pause right there. Tell us a little bit about that and what that means.
basically, it means that the Hirosaki style of Kimpuryu is something that Hirosaki is proud of and wants to preserve. And so, designating certain treasure holders, the idea behind that is to actually, we'll have a way to preserve that culture and also sort of charge these people with the task of preserving it and disseminating it too. So, and part of the idea is to keep people interested in Kimpuryu and also represent the sort of the Hirosaki style of playing, right? Because a lot of schools are interested in Kimpuryu, and naturally and appropriately, the kind of Kimpuryu has molded into the style of those respective schools, right? But we also kind of want to uh, keep what's been happening here in Hirosaki. We also kind of want to get Japanese people interested in it as well. And so
I
that's
understand.
something that's
Mhm.
in Japan, it's a little bit more difficult to get people interested in older styles of playing. People tend to gravitate towards Tozan Ryu is the biggest school, right? Where we're just doing kind of modern pieces. And again, that's like really awesome too. But it's nice when the older style of doing things and kind of more traditional Japanese culture is represented as well. But as things go for most of us, you don't necessarily appreciate what you have until you've been away from it and can see it from the outside, right?
Yeah. And I also resonate too. I mean, I think a lot of our experiences are going to overlap. I've been
Mm.
trying to do getting a young chugakse, like middle school and high school students to start a beginner shakuhachi course, and it's very difficult to even just get two young students interested in it. And
Yeah.
then we hope to do like a big class, so they call it like a one coin lesson, 500 yen, which is like
Mm.
$4, for a class, a group class. And it's even then there's like, well, no, I don't want to. That's mendo is kind of the
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, Mendo is a nice word to understand in Japanese, right? For the
yeah,
people who don't know, it means sort of like troublesome or annoying, but like you have to do something that you don't feel like doing, right?
yeah.
Kind of
And the full word is
takes work.
it's mendo is it's even funny because it's mendo to say the full word with this mendokusai.
Yeah,
So
mendokusai. It stinks of work,
yeah,
right?
things of work
Mendokusai.
exactly mendokusai.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult, and when people do pick it up, though, when young kids are picking it up, they tend to really go gung ho for it, which is really great. It's just that number is so
Mm.
low. I had talked about to most of the people who I've met, like older gentlemen who are playing shakuhachi, are Tozan Ryu. There's a few Myowan people that I've met and Chikuho, but predominantly
Mhm.
Tozan. And what they said is like, oh yeah, I played it once when I was 19, but I wasn't that interested. And I kept the shakuhachi in my closet, and I found it last year, and I decided I'd pick it up again. And then so they started playing at 59, and then they keep going until they pass. But it's always like this later of life. I have too much time on my
Mm.
hands, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be the hobby the entire life. So we should do something. We need to collaborate more on that and find some ways.
Yeah, I'd actually like to pick your brain about that a little bit. I mean, I'm on the Chichiyoyakai for my daughter's elementary school this year, right? So the fathers committee, and they kind of organize a school sleepover and this kind of thing. But I thought that might give some opportunity to exposing everybody to the local school of Shakuhachi, right? And
That's right.
I think it's when you do something like that, this is where you're a lot better at this than I am, I think, is kind of showing people how to appreciate something. I tend to be kind of like, yeah, here's the way we used to do it 200 years ago, and none of you will like this. But too bad. But there's sometimes you do have to like you have to know that old, but you have to kind of acknowledge the world that we live in too, and that's somewhere where I probably need to grow a little bit. So maybe maybe you can help me out with that a little bit.
Yeah, and I always need to look back more. Sometimes I forget the historic roots of shakuhachi. Sometimes they just slip because you get so inundated with the modern world, and so I have to get my record player back out, dust off the old vinyls, and kind of like, okay, please don't scratch or break, and then re-listen to those
Yeah.
really old recordings or digitize them. But I definitely understand that.
Mm.
Even in the case of playing modern music or anime music, it's so difficult to keep up with what they want to hear. I remember
Yeah.
this year we actually did a presentation at a school and we played Kimetsu no Yaiba, the opening da da da, the
Yeah.
Gunren, I think it's called. And the like I was like, this is already old. These kids don't like this anime. We need to go back to One Piece. And I was right. We played,
Yeah,
so we
it's
played
crazy.
the
Like
tune.
Kimetsu is already old. Like how does that?
I know it's like, but
Uh,
for like
yeah.
elementary school, middle school, they were just like, no,
Yeah, it's like a decade ago almost, right?
I've heard that already. Mendel.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we gotta, let's like, go back to One Piece and some of the new like theme music that they have, or like, or something that like those kids are really into, and it's so hard because it changes so fast. So, and
Yeah.
which is difficult because the Japanese culture, especially the older generation, moves slowly. So by the time they figure out what the tune is, they transcribe it, rehearse it, and say, okay, next year we're going to play it. And like, no, that's already too late. You're
Yeah.
missing the point. It's going to have changed twice already by that point. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a conflict of generational like viewpoints there that will it's very difficult. Which I think where for Westerners, and I think that for both of us, most of my students are all foreigners. I have one or two Japanese students, and the Westerners are always very interested in the old way of playing. They're very interested in history.
Mm.
They're very interested in like, oh yeah, I'd love to play Honkyoku. And then when I say, okay, here's this contemporary piece, they're gonna be like, Mendo. So it's
Yeah.
kind of the opposite. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, I'm just interested in how to get that to come over to Japan with the younger generation as well. So we'll talk about that sometime.
Yeah. I think there's got to be. I mean, especially given the way culture is moving too fast right now, there is definitely a place for something that is kind of slow and healing. I mean, there's the physical act of breathing, and deep breathing slows you down and makes you become a little bit more present, right? Um,
Absolutely.
it I feel like I need to find a way to sort of communicate that to people. Like, what are you finding in this? What exactly exists in this? I had a friend and I were just talking this morning about how shakuhachi makes you patient, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't think there's too many extremely impatient people playing shakuhachi because they would have given up before they got to make a sound, you know? Um, it teaches
I
some
do
valuable things.
I do struggle with patience, but it's a different type of problem. I know I'm a procrastinator, so I don't wait to
Yeah.
do or act on anything. I've learned to not put things off, so then I go for it. So there's an impatience there that goes along with it. But I agree with you. You can't be impatient when it comes to learning it because things just take time. And I mean, how many times have you had students when they're like, "Well, I'm really having a struggle with kana notes." It's like, I've showed you all the techniques for that. Just be patient; it will come. Just give it time. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's the worst answer to hear. Like you hate. It's like just, oh, then what? What am I waiting for? well, technique to develop and so on and so forth.
And I think it teaches a lot of things that can apply. You could say it about anything. You could say it about martial arts or sports or anything else. But there's certain things about shakuhachi that just happen in your body, that you don't necessarily consciously control. So, I
Mm,
mean, it's not like you can say, oh, I'm just going to do this, and then I can play. It's more like you've got to sort of like skiing downhill. When I picked up skiing again when my daughter got into it, but I hadn't skied for like 20 years. So the first time down, I fell down a time or two, and I realized like, wait a minute, I can't like will myself into doing this. I just have to trust my body to figure it out.
mm.
And so I relaxed and I went down. I let myself fall down, and as I did that, like the right muscles started developing. The next time I went, I could go down fine. And I feel like shakuhachi is sort of similar, where you've got to trust your body and put in the time.
Yeah,
You do those two things, and you can get there.
you can't try too hard. It has to be natural. Um, yeah, I think that my favorite thing about shakuhachi is the slowing down of heart rate when you play, especially like long slow tunes, like when you're not trying to like you know
Mm.
do like the crazy contemporary stuff that I do sometimes, but like the actual honkyoku long phrases, and it's it really helps me for slowing down, because my life moves
Mm.
100 miles an hour sometimes with how many interviews and YouTube and lessons and performances and taking care of a family, and the whole entire drill. You do the same thing, and then you can just sit down and go, you know what, Kyoto sounding really nice about right now, and you just
Mm.
go through and you let that nice long breath go, and you can just feel your heartbeat slowing down, and it was at 80, now it's at 60, now I'm at 40, now I'm resting at 40 beats. It's like, that's just amazing.
Yeah, really, it changes your body. It changes the atmosphere too.
Yeah, the Fuinki, the whole entire atmosphere of the room, it just completely melds to something else, and all the worries of the world melt away for that time.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
Even when I first started playing, I was also really attracted to the way that shakuhachi seemed to be so honest. Like it really, because if you're playing when you play modern pieces, it's got a rhythm and a tempo, and you can kind of fake your way through it, I guess. I'll have to explain what I mean by that. Not that anything's fake, but when you play honkyoku and it's time to your breath, all of your body comes out in the breath, right? You can't really hide it. Like if I am tired, my sound sounds tired. And
Hmm.
if I try to sound more energetic, it sounds bad. But if I acknowledge what's going on in my body, it's like, you know what? I'm tired today. It's going to be a quiet sound. And then you actually find something that's really interesting in that piece that you haven't necessarily found before, because you're aligning yourself with the truth of what actually is.
Hmm. Absolutely. You
Mm.
cannot hide behind the shakuhachi. There was actually a taiko guy, who I quoted in a different video that I did. He was talking about people wear masks in a lot of their lives. Like you talked about the mask of a beekeeper, the mask of a kindergarten teacher, the mask of a woodshop worker, the
Mm.
mask of a husband, the mask of a father, and all these sort of things. But
Mm.
shakuhachi seems to be like another mask remover. It's more of like a veil, and so the veil gets put on as soon as you put the shakuhachi to the face. But once you blow the note, the veil comes open, and there you are, exposed completely to the audience members, and they
Mm.
see you for who you are. I really, I had this one student. He has since passed. He was a very good friend of mine, and we had spent so many hours, like how we spend, just talking about stuff. He was a professional musician. I even ran a
Mm.
scholarship, teaching shakuhachi for free for some students who wrote an article or whatever. And I remember he sat me down one time. He's like, Sean, when I take he was Spanish. He says, Sean, do you know, when I take a lesson with you, I absolutely hate you, but then I listen to you play and I love you once again. and,
Yeah.
and it was interesting. It's not like it's like you're so amazing, you're so good. It's because I know who you are when you play. Like I see the sincerity of certain parts. I resonate with that. Like my heart, my vibration vibrates with you, and I'm about that. And
Yeah.
so in his sort of view of it, in which is a lot very similar to my view, is that when I don't like how someone plays, it's not necessarily that they're doing anything wrong. It's not an objective thing. It's a subjective thing, which is that the way that my heart vibrates, and I'm talking heart is the metaphysical sense in terms of
Yeah.
like spirit, a way that my on my vibrational level just isn't with them. And so there's a chord that strikes, and the dissonance between the two vibrations just don't work. And so, and which is interesting, because you would think that for some people who I get along with in terms of hanging out and talking would be great, and sometimes those people are just like, let's not do shakuhachi together. And then, but like our relationship, we're like the exact opposite in many ways. But it's actually a very nice harmony. I really enjoy your playing. I actually really like the way you play, especially off camera. Like when none of the lights are on or anything, and you just play. It's really nice. I love hearing you. And so that's the sort of stuff that it's just so interesting to me how music connects, especially the shakuhachi.
Yeah, that's mutual. I think that, there's sort of surface level things like using a fork versus using chopsticks, but the act of eating is the same, right? Like, and
Yeah.
maybe you and I, maybe we use different utensils, and maybe we're both using just a different kind of chopsticks or something, but the act of eating resonates with me very much,
Yeah.
It's mutual the way that you play as well.
So I want to move on to this. This is the second to last portion of this interview, which is the project that we're going to be engaging in, and you have the virus that you infected with me, and it's not corona. So it is the Hitoyogiri virus, and it's coming to the town near you. And
you don't need a mask.
And you don't need a mask to play
to prevent.
Yeah, no. Spread is it's 100% infection rate. There is no way that you're not going to be infected with it. And so I'll also take mine out as well and show off. So we got our Hitoyogiri going. So it showed me
a whole team of them sitting here in front of me.
and also you're repairing mine as well. So I'm very excited to have that back one time. I'm very, very much looking forward to having that back in my hands as well. So I had known about the Hitoyogiri. Most of the time I've always heard it was always kind of like pop music or kind of played like a kena. And let's just first tell people, what is a Hitoyogiri?
Yeah, right. So the Hitoyogiri was first called the Shakuhachi, and then it became known as the Hitoyogiri Shakuhachi, or just the Hitoyogiri, a little bit later on when the Fuke Shakuhachi, right, in the Edo era with the Komuso and everything, when that came into vogue, they started making longer, bigger shakuhachi, and that became the thing that kind of got the default shakuhachi moniker. But before that, there was a Hitoyogiri. It was called Hitoyogiri because there's hitotsu, one, yo, fushi, that's one node. And a kiri is a cut of bamboo, so it's a cut of bamboo with one node on it, right? And this was used when we still have Ikkyu's shakuhachi. This is a replica of Ikkyu's shakuhachi. That's a little bit shorter, but it's a Hitoyogiri, right? Again, the sort of somewhat legendary Roan who brought shakuhachi over to Japan from China, or whatever story you go with, right? He was apparently a contemporary of Ikkyu, right? So, and he is kind of credited with being the originator of the Hitoyogiri repertoire. But again, that depends on what you believe and what stories you follow.
And here's a picture of Biowan from the.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So
nice. I think there's a more, definitely a newer illustration. There's a drawing of him in this in Shikukokinshu, right?
Oh yeah. That guy
that's obviously not drawn by somebody who ever saw him, I'm sure, but
yeah. Yeah, this one has him playing shakuhachi, like the long flute. So
yeah.
But
yeah, it's really hard to tell what is actually true and what isn't. But we do know that at least, Hitoyogiri was being played by people maybe as far back as almost, 900 or so years ago. It appears in the Tale of Genji, which is maybe a Gagaku shakuhachi or a Hitoyogiri shakuhachi, one of the two. Mm-hmm. Right. So
Your thoughts on Shoto Kutaishi? Do you think he was playing Hitoyogiri, or do you think it was Gagaku Shakahachi?
What year would that have been?
600s, I believe. I can look it
Shoot, man. I'd have to go back and ask him. I don't know.
up.
Probably, my sense is that the consensus would say something like the Gagaku Shakuhachi because that's probably the oldest one, right?
Maybe it's five. His dates are 574 to 622.
Mm.
So it's a tough
I
one.
mean, the all we know with certainty about the Hitoyogiri is that around maybe towards the end of the 14th century, uh, we know that they're definitely around and it's being played. And then we've got illustrations of all five lengths in the Taigensho, which is a musical dictionary written around 1512. And then the oldest scores and things that we have are from about 1604. That would be Tanteki Hidenfu. Right, but again, it's complete by that time, so it's obviously been around for much longer than that. So, could EQ have been playing these same pieces? Possibly, or was he playing something else? Possibly. I don't know if there's any way to say for sure, but if there was this mythical Rohan and he was a friend of EQ, then maybe they were actually playing some primitive versions of the pieces that we're trying to kind of resurrect right now.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because that's right at the brink of the Edo period, 1604, and
Yeah.
it must have been a very popular Muromachi Kamakura time for this version of Shakuhachi. I want to go into what so I'm gonna I'll talk you up a little bit because I think what's so amazing of the work that you're doing here is that you're really reconstructing something that's been lost. It hasn't been played for God knows how many years. And I remember you were telling me one of the recordings you found from the early 1900s, and you were like, "Oh, that's awesome!" It's like this is not the classical style at all. It's just someone
Yeah.
picking it up and playing it like how we would play modern shakuhachi.
Right.
And you originally had reached out to me to compare notes with Shomyo. I had studied
Yeah.
Shomyo for those who don't know. I've studied Shomyo for better half of a year and so on with a monk from a very reputable. He's the head professor of Shomyo, and going through and seeing the similarities between the Shomyo melodies that are also in the modal system, the Ritsuryo and Gagaku modes, and then going through it. But what I find so interesting is that in the literature, there's an assumption that you've talked about. The assumption is that you already know a lot of the basics of how this instrument works, and they never talk about that. How has your process been on taking these old Edo manuals and kind of, as you're going through them and dissecting it, how are you going about to make this a melody? Like, oh, this is maybe something of how it would have sounded.
Kind of strangely here, the my Bible college education actually helped me out a little bit because one of the things that they stressed when I was in there is that we want to interpret the Bible by the Bible. So they talk a kind of inductive study. So instead of kind of putting your own interpretation onto things, you read things the way that they would have read themselves as much as possible, right? And of course, it's how can you
Hermeneutics
ever be
101.
completely objective, but so that's kind of the approach that I took was just taking all these, we're left with like 5 or 6 manuals from around the Edo era, right? So the process was just take them, read through them, and then say like, all right, what can I say for sure? And if there's certain things, if you read enough, you can tell what the scales are, and you can tell basically what the pitches would be. Again, it's not pitches that are on the piano because the sense of pitch then was a little bit different in terms of, it was a little bit lower. An A was 432 hertz instead of 440 hertz, and this kind of thing, right? There's some differences, but the 12-note scale is the 12-note scale, so you can pretty much tell what the pitches of the scales were supposed to be. So that's a starting point, right? And we know that certain fingerings are designated, so that's another starting point. So I started on the certainties and then just played through everything and kept on reading the other descriptions. They were really nice in leaving us descriptions of different techniques, telling us how to play. And again, I even use a lot, quite a bit about the music theory behind it is accessible. So I mean, with all those things, you can reconstruct quite a bit, right? But there's always going to be things that are left up to art rather than science. So I do everything by science that I can, and then after that, you have to be like, well, here's somebody from 500 years ago, but they're human, so let's take that same human heart, even if I'm in a different atmosphere, and try to imagine like what, how do you put your feeling into it? Because human feelings aren't so different from generation to generation. We have certain things in common, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then as much as possible, and that's why I contacted you about Shomyo, like let's, the parts that we can't fill in from the Hitoyogiri manuals, let's fill them in from things that they would have been exposed to, right? Which would be, one would be Shomyo, and I'm sure that that had some influence over the music, because it's clear that these people had some philosophical interest, right? It was being played, there's images of these pieces being played by monks and samurai, right? And there were people who had maybe a little bit of extra time for some sort of a leisure time or pastime, and they would have been educated. They would have known how to do shomyo, for example, or they would have known about gagaku and the modes, and how each note within the scale tends to behave in different circumstances. Um, so
There's a lot of singing styles too that are similar. Like shigin, also the roe in gagaku music, as
mhm,
well as other even singing styles. Even within the sangkyoku style of singing, there are a lot of things that are similar. The way they produce sounds, and also different types of of course the mode that we're using, them using the quasi miyakobushi, will be different. But
mhm,
the overall feeling and maneuvering that they do with the voice is quite similar. And what I found to be really interesting is, as we've been working together, it's wow, it's been like we put a lot of hours in together. I'm just thinking about it now, how many,
yeah,
the videos sending back and forth, the videos meetings, and it's been really intense. And I'm even as something of like, we just look at this one note, which is just a quick rearticulation, and we're sitting there just going, well, we could do it like this, we could do it like this, or we could do it like this. And then sometimes I remember this one we were talking about, which was in the sojo mode, when we have the ya. Do we want to do the rearticulation of fu there, or? And I remember I was thinking about it a lot with you. We were kind of talking about which one works better, and it had dawned upon me. And I remember you and I both had the same concern. Like, I don't know which one's right. And it had dawned upon me. It's like, you know what? I don't think that it's about it sounding how we think it's supposed to sound. If they wrote the note to be all holes closed, they meant it all holes closed. And we don't want the other modes to start sounding like a different mode. We want it to have its own distinctive voice. And just kind of coming to those realizations, recording myself and listening back, and then just thinking to myself, which one really fits the voice most naturally? And
mhm,
it's a really quite of an amazing process. And one thing that you had mentioned too in one of your videos about learning the rhythm of a jishi piece, just start playing it again and again and again, and the rhythm just starts to unveil itself. Like, oh, I want to be a short note, and oh, I want to be a long note. It's like the
mhm.
page is becoming alive, and the music is saying, oh, you really want to play me, I guess. Okay, I'll give you a little bit of a hint. Here, let's see what you do with that. We got it. Okay, well, I'll show you a little bit more, so that by the time you're on the sixth, seventh iteration, you have some sort of idea of what the rhythm might have sounded like.
Yeah, I think you said this before. I think we might have talked about it in other contexts, but shakuhachi is really about listening, right? Even when you're playing, you're listening. You're listening to yourself, and you're listening to other things that are going on, right, in the atmosphere at the same time. And that's, I mean, you have to be able to listen to the piece and let it sort of speak for itself a little bit, right?
I found, as we were looking through all the spring mode pieces, I had been sitting inside and just going through every single piece and just playing them again and again and trying to develop a general feeling. And I had decided I was going to take my daughter for a little walk, so I walked out, and I still had the Hitoyogiri with me. I'm like, you know what? it's spring right now. I'm going to play this at the park. There's no one there, and I'm just going to listen. And then everything started to click in terms of like, I get it. That bouncing sound here, this here, that's like the spring. It's like springing up. It's exciting. It's a lot more energetic versus the other modes like Oshiki. That's much softer and much more subdued, like the summer mode should be.
Yeah.
And of course, with the doyo, it doesn't really have that kind of sound, but it's
Right.
the
Because
banshi.
it's the grounding mode, right? The doyo
Yeah.
is meant to kind of ground you, and it's supposed to be very steady, and then that's what it is.
And so I'm enjoying it a lot. And so one of the things that Nick and I have decided to do, now talking to you, audience member, is that we are doing a full-length course, 3 months in spring. So Nick is the head teacher, and I am an assistant teaching this course. So you get two for the price of one. And I'll let you talk a little bit about the how they're going to get a Hitoyogiri. But in terms of the courses, the course, what it's going to be, is it'll start in spring. The dates are to be announced. You'll be able to find a link about it, or there's a link in the description below where it has more information about it. But the general gist of it is it's going to be 12 lessons. Technically 24 because there's going to be a morning and an evening class, which will be repeat courses. Everything will be recorded and then uploaded to a drive where you have access. It's $500 for the full 3-month course. And I'm just really excited about it. Looking at all the materials and how we're setting it up, it's going to be a lot of fun. And so, but now the question becomes like, well, Nick, this instrument hasn't been around forever, and I bet there's not a bunch of Edo flutes just laying around. So how are they going to get a flute?
Yeah, so we've been working on that. We wanted to provide a kind of very cost-effective Hitoyogiri for everybody to play and do that in a way that everybody can have the same one, right? It's important that everybody play the same instrument because we want to be able to help you learn how to play it, find its optimal range. The Hitoyogiri is very flexible, right? And you can get almost, well, let's see. You can get quite a range of notes out of it, but there is an optimal range to play the flute in, right? So we want to be able to kind of communicate that to everybody in a way that is reliable, so we don't want everybody having a different instrument. So we've got very cost-effective Hitoyogiris in the works as part of the course.
And what about, I'm going to ask you a couple of the frequently asked questions. So, do I need to know Japanese to learn Hitoyogiri?
No. Hopefully, Sean and I can take care of that for you guys.
Okay. Well, what about materials and music? Is that going to cost us extra money?
Nope, that's part of the course.
Well, let's say if I miss a course, what happens?
You watch the video. All right, we'll have everything recorded. And again, we're also doing these on a time scale that will hopefully work for pretty much anywhere in the world, whether you are here or there, on this side or on that side. You should be able to use either the morning or the evening class. It should kind of fit into your waking hours. So hopefully that'll be very accessible to everybody.
But Nick, I'm really fancy and I want a real Hitoyogiri. How do I get a bamboo Hitoyogiri?
We can help you with that, right? I think actually Sean would be the one to go through, and I will be making those. All right, I've got plenty of really nice susudake and other bamboo if you want something with all the works and gold lettering and bindings and all that sort of thing, right?
Awesome. And of course, there will be also future courses as well in addition to this, so it doesn't just stop with the 3-month. There's a lot to go over in Hitoyogiri.
Yeah, that will get through everything in just the 3 months, right?
So yeah, I'm very excited for that. And I think before we go to our last topic, do you want to play us a piece on Hitoyogiri?
Oh yeah, sure. Let's give you the first piece, Shote. Another thing that I like about Hitoyogiri, by the way, is it's a nice complement for Shakuhachi, right? Some of the Shakuhachi pieces, a lot of them happened in the Edo era, where you've got this sort of oppressive government, you've got your neighbors spying on you. It's hard to tell the truth, so you've got to do it through sounds instead of through words. And some of those are very heavy, right? And there's very deep themes, and I love that. And, Hitoyogiri has a lot of depth too, but it gives you this sort of a picture of a different Japan, of that sort of Heian era Japan. And there's just a lot of that bitsu and yo scale is very peaceful, right? And you can kind of hear that in it.
So I hope that you will join Nick and I in literally resurrecting the Hitoyogiri from the grave and giving it a new life. I think it's just wonderful. And I'll just give my little 2 cents about Hitoyogiri is that it is so easy to travel anywhere with, and it's a very simple design, and which gives it this. I think you can hear it. It's just like this time stops sort of experience, and everything is just about the one note in the relationship to the next note, and so very cost effective as an instrument, very cost effective course. I think it ends up being like $20 per class, so $20 and some change. And then also, it's an instrument that you can take anywhere with you. It's one that can fit in your pocket. It's so,
And like you said, it's meant to be played outside. It's even explicitly written in some of these manuals, like you should play it outside, because it's about each season has its own mode, and you play that mode during that season and kind of help just enjoy listening and looking at what's around you.
absolutely.
Mm.
So the last part of this interview I want to talk about is all one that's also very near and dear to me is being a Christian and playing shakuhachi. And I know that you've gotten some backlash from that in playing traditional honkyoku music. And so I want to ask you about your perspective of Christian life as a shakuhachi player, and finding when you find your identity in Christ and what that means to be, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm drawn to things that are difficult, and I'm drawn to things that I don't understand. And when I started playing Myoan Shakuhachi too, that was part of it. The scale wasn't what I had heard on Shakuhachi records. Hitoyogiri has actually helped me to understand what I was doing a little bit better. But as a Christian, right, I had huge doubts. And like on the one hand, I loved this. I just loved playing shakuhachi, and I was really drawn to the honkyoku. But there's a potential conflict. Like, it's ostensibly Buddhist music, and that's actually, you can kind of poke some holes in that idea, because it's not necessarily. My current understanding is more along the Hitoyogiri lines, is that these are people who liked Zen philosophy, they liked Chinese philosophy, and a lot of those philosophical ideas come into the music. But the music itself is designed to be neutral and express the person who is playing it. That's what they mean by honnin no kyoku, right? Honkyoku. The music of the person who's playing it is one common interpretation there. And that's what I would take. But nevertheless, I had a lot of doubts about, I mean, like the first question you asked me, right? I see myself as somebody who's loved by God, and I really want to, I want to make God happy. I want God to be happy with the things that I'm doing. And to somebody who's not a Christian, might sound like a pretty silly thing to worry about, but nevertheless, being aware of that is something that I did worry about a lot. Some people, I listened to other people and see like what they thought about it, and there was one Irish fellow, I talked about it in Japan, and he's like, "Well, regardless, can't it be redeemed?" Yeah, which was, and I just love that. And that's the accent is part of the way those words fit into my heart, because when you look at people like Johnny Cash, for example, you take the Depeche Mode, Your Own Personal Jesus, he's doing it sarcastically, and then Johnny Cash takes that same song and he sings it to express his own faith in Jesus. So there's something to be said where a piece can take on the meaning of the person who's playing it. And again, that is my position. But at times somebody's like, "Oh, Shakuhachi doesn't have Christian spirit. You should play shamisen." I've been told that. But what
Mm-hmm.
I think about that is that's actually a legitimate concern, because a lot of Western Christianity does tend to have this reputation of being very extroverted, and you've got to be in the worship band and be like smiling while you're playing guitar or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you don't always feel like smiling. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's okay. Maybe there's more emotions than just happy, right? And maybe those are part of prayer. And that kind of got me looking into the history of Christianity when I found Gregorian chant, and that monastic practices were all about singing the Psalms day in and day out. When you start to read the Psalms, you see murderous anger, you see joy, you see sorrow, you see loneliness. My closest friend is darkness. Um, you see looking at all of creation, just being like, wow. I mean, there's just the entire realm of human experience is all expressed there, and that's a little bit more of what shakuhachi is to me. I don't think that it's contrary to the Christian spirit or the experience of somebody who follows Jesus in the least, especially people with a little bit of a temperament towards enjoying a small amount of solitude now and then.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest doubt, though, when I came to Japan, I was doubting like everything. I had no friends. I was living alone. I was working hard, and they say psychologically you can kind of get into this mode of hypervigilance, right? Like imagine if you don't have any friends or family, you're going to be really looking out for offending people, and that's kind of I was like always, am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay? Uh, and there was one Christian who I met, and she was kind of, I asked her to kind of talk to God about this with me. And, she's like, well, what do and why don't you just ask God about it? What does he think about you playing shakuhachi? And he was like, praise my name. I heard God speaking in my heart, like, this is yours. Go ahead, do it. Nevertheless, I wouldn't let go of my doubts. And this woman who I was talking with, like, I don't think you can do this. I think this is, she was one of these people who was like, you can't eat raw fish because it's in the Old Testament or something, right?
Yeah.
so, so like, I was like, you know what? God is more important to me than anything else. I'm going to throw out all my shakuhachi, and I did.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I needed that. It sounds stupid probably, but I needed that because I needed to know in my heart that I love something more than shakuhachi, and that was the only way I could convince myself of that. And then after a week or so later, I realized that I had also thrown away the gift that God gave me, and another shakuhachi quickly found its way into my hands again, but in a much different way than before. And that was the point. I was like, after that, well, I doubted this as much as I possibly can, and I found out that that was the wrong answer. So I don't have too much room for doubting whether or not I can play shakuhachi as a Christian anymore.
Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of quotes that you reminded me of, and I'm pulling them up right now so I don't misquote. And they're both by Martin Luther. Um, the first thing is this quote where it says, "Music is one of the fairest and most glorious gifts of God, to which Satan is a bitter enemy, for it moves from the heart the weight of sorrow and the fascination of evil thoughts." And for those who are very well learned in the Bible, they know that Satan's or Lucifer's job when he was in heaven as one of the brightest and one of the most glorious angels of God was he was the head court musician. And so it's interesting that we view this that his old job is now his worst enemy. He absolutely just hates the tunes and he hates when he sings the glory. And what I find to be even more interesting is, so Luther, one of the things he would do is he would take he would write new hymns, and he would take bar tunes, like old, like people were getting drunk and going to the brothels, and he would take those melodies like "Mighty Fortress is Our God," da, 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 and then take that and then put it and make it a story about a song about God. And people were like, "Why on earth would you do that?" And his quote, or what he's said to have said, was, "Why should the devil have all the good tunes?"
Yeah,
And
right.
and I
And
and
he
I
usually does. Like all the Led Zeppelin and like all the good records were always, you know.
yeah, yeah, it's a lot of, really really good tunes.
Yeah.
So and but also at the same time, with everything that we do, it's like, keep every thought captive in Christ is another very common Bible verse, and that's used as for
Yeah.
apologetics. And then
And where the
also,
spirit is, there's freedom. You know, that was another big one that spoke to me because there's freedom when God is there. Everything is good, right? And again, like if Satan is washing the dishes, then washing the dishes becomes evil. If Jesus is washing the dishes is good.
mhm.
It's there's a lot of things that are neutral and just depend on the person who's doing them.
And also Colossians 3:16 and 17. It's let the message of Christ dwell among you richly, and as you
Mhm.
teach and admonish one another with wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs of the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your heart. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. Give thanks to God the Father through Him. And it's amazing when somebody has said, sometimes they ask, like, well, what happens if someone's giving to the poor and they don't have Jesus? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's like, well, in a worldly view, it's a good thing, but if they don't have Christ in an eternal view, it's a negative thing, because it ends up being for the self rather than for the one who made you and one who gives you all that you have. And I like that what you said there is like, you throw this away and then you realize you've thrown away the gift that God has given you, which is the gift of music, and of course the connection you have with it. And it's a great passport into the Japanese culture, to which you can show people the gospel without punching it in their face and down their throat, which
Yeah,
is
exactly. I mean, I don't think I have the right to speak into anybody's life unless I've done a good listening to them first, you know? And
great.
it's something you've got to earn.
Yeah. It's a very important subject for people like you and me, and especially being foreigners living in a big pagan land. It's very few Christians here, and
Mhm.
the Shinto and Buddhist religions, of course, more nominal than they are actually practiced in any sense. But um,
It's funny. It's almost a reverse situation from the United States, where people see Catholicism as the thing that's kind of been there, and many people are just doing it because they've done it and don't really necessarily feel it. You know, not to knock Catholicism specifically. A lot of my favorite writers are Catholics, but you know, in Japan, that is Buddhism. It's you can find genuine Buddhists, but there are probably fewer than people who just identify as Buddhists but don't really do anything about it.
yeah, definitely the nominal. Go to the temple on the big events, New Year's, and go to the shrine, and do the mikoshi when it happens, and so on and
Mm.
so forth. Motions of the ocean. Same thing with the like they go to Easter, they go to the New Year's festivals, and so on at church as well. So definitely, I understand that, and I see that here as well within the culture of Japan. But nonetheless, it's a fascinating conversation, and I want to thank you for all the time that you gave me today to do this video and to learn more about you. Where can people go to learn even more about you?
You can see my infrequently updated website at www.hon-on.com, honon.com.
You can find that in the description box below. All right. Well, I'm
Right on.
really looking forward
Thanks a bunch,
to
Sean.
yeah, I'm really looking forward for our project and working together, and continue to develop our relationship. So, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks a bunch.